In 1980, at the University of Tennessee football game here, I'm sitting out in the stands as president of the Alumni Association, and a state trooper tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Governor Fob James wants you to come to a house over in Opelika tonight at 6:30. Will you be there?" And I said, "Yes, sir." I showed up over in Opelika at 6:30, and there were 3 trustees there, and Fob said, "We're firing the football coach at the end of the year, and I have talked to Vince Dooley, the head coach at Georgia, and he's agreed to come." Auburn University formed this committee. It was Mike McCartney, it was Morris Savage, it was John Denson, and myself. I still actually have the document that Coach Dooley signed with me. He'd make $100,000 a year to be the head coach at Auburn. But what happened was, after he signed that agreement, when in Birmingham, he got in a plane and flew down to Tampa, and then between Tampa and Athens, Georgia, he was offered a big raise at Georgia, and they promised him within the next year he'd be made athletic director. So that's when we decided we had to go out and find another head football coach. We interviewed Jackie Sherrill, who at that time was a very successful head coach at Pittsburgh. We interviewed Bobby Bowden, who was just beginning to have success at Florida State. And we interviewed Pat Dye. Pat Dye was at Wyoming at the time and had not signed a contract. He'd only been there a year. And so Pat was calling me almost every night saying, "They're giving me an ultimatum out here. If I don't sign the contract, I'm gone." And I said, "Well, Pat, I can't tell you you're going to get the job. I believe you're going to get the job." The committee recommended to the board that Pat Dye be hired, and he was hired. And that was, I think, the beginning of turning around Auburn football. 1982, we beat Alabama for the first time. You got to understand that from the 40s into the 70s, Auburn was considered second rate. The Alabama people looked down on us, called us the Cow College, and they had beaten us 10 straight years. So Pat Dye comes in the second year he's here, he beats Bear Bryant, and that was just a great relief and a great start for Auburn. We beat again in 83. We had 2 close losses in 84 and 85, and then in 86, we beat them for the next 4 straight years. So during that period of time, everything was changing at Auburn. All of our colleges began to really be good. The business college began to grow. Auburn was moving in the right direction. It became the most popular student-wise university to come to Auburn and not to Alabama. And the Alabama people didn't like that. We discussed on the Board of Trustees. We had moved all of our games to home and home. All the big rivals were coming except to Alabama. So we formed a committee on the Board of Trustees. It was myself, Mike McCartney, and Morris Savage. And we contacted the Alabama people that the year that it was going to be our first year as a home team, it was going to be played in Auburn. So we agreed to have a meeting between the 2 committees. There was Mr. Red Blunt, who was chair of the Alabama Board of Trustees, Tom Rask, Mr. Bromberg. We were scheduled to meet at the Capital City Club in downtown Montgomery. Our group met at my office, and they asked me to be the lead spokesman, I guess because I was young and I was crazy. So we get over at 4 o'clock, and of course, Alabama's not there. I told my 2 friends, I said, that's just a negotiation tactic. They're trying to intimidate us. So about 4:30, Mr. Blunt comes in with his folks. And you got to understand now, Mr. Blunt was probably one of the wealthiest people in the state of Alabama. And when they came in and sat down, the first thing Mr. Blunt said to us was, the University of Alabama will never come to Auburn and play a football game. And so I looked across at Mr. Blunt and I said, with all due respect to you, sir, in 1989, Auburn is going to be waiting in Jordan-Hare Stadium. If y'all show up, it's going to be a hell of a football game. But if you don't, you're going to forfeit the game. And we got up and left the meeting. They yelled and they screamed, and the city of Birmingham threatened us. The president of Alabama Power Company wrote us a letter and said they were going to stop all support. I said, you call the president of Alabama Power and you tell him you'll tear up that letter if you wanted to. If not, we're going to publish it in every newspaper in the state. We didn't hear another word out of him. But guess what? 1989, the game was moved there. We won the game. And then they moved it to Tuscaloosa 4 or 5 years later. So that got that changed. In the 60s and 70s, the only building that was built at Auburn University was the Haley Center. We would not push in Auburn University for its strengths. We really didn't have a business school to speak of. They wanted to make Auburn into the Yale of the South, and that just wasn't going to work. And so we determined in the late 1980s, College of Business is going to be one of the futures for Auburn University. So finally, I said at a Board of Trustees meeting, we're not going to start another building until we break ground on the new College of Business. And I insisted because we needed classrooms. The university is ultimately judged by the product they put out, and the product they put out is our students. So if we're putting out good students, that means we're successful. My mother and father met here. They married while my father was working for Auburn University. So I have always loved Auburn University. It's meant a lot to me and my family. I've had a son and a daughter graduate here. I've got grandkids that are coming here. I think Auburn University is a great place. It's a real service. It's a real asset to the state of Alabama. It's a real asset to the United States of America, and we should all be proud of Auburn. And as long as the Auburn people are pulling together and working for what's best for Auburn University, we'll succeed.